She didn't plan to be a hero that night. She didn't even plan to stop. The rain was coming down in cold, sharp sheets, the kind that made the streets look like rivers of glass. Her name was Clara Hayes, a 32-year-old nurse who'd just finished a double shift at the hospital. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, her scrubs still faintly smelling of antiseptic and coffee. But as she drove home down that empty road, headlights cutting through the darkness, something caught her eye, a figure lying by the side of the street, half in the mud, half on the asphalt. At first, she thought it was just a drunk man. People passed out there sometimes. This was the rough side of town. But when she slowed down, she saw the uniform. The torn camouflage, the boots splattered with blood, the trembling hand clutching a dog tag. Her heart jumped. That wasn't just anyone. That was a soldier hurt, alone, bleeding. She pulled over without a second thought. Her heart pounded in her ears as she jumped out, running through the rain. Hey, can you hear me?" she shouted, kneeling beside him. The man looked up weakly, his lips cracked, eyes half open. "Help, ambushed," he rasped. His chest was slick with blood. He'd been stabbed multiple times, deep wounds cutting across his side. "Hold on," Clara whispered, tearing open her car's first aid kit. Her hands shook as she pressed gauze against the wounds, rain mixing with blood, washing crimson streaks into the gutter. "Stay with me, soldier." "What's your name?" he coughed, voice trembling. "Private Mason, 3rd Marines." "Mason, I'm Clara. You're going to be okay." "I'm a nurse. Just hold on." Her voice was steady, but inside she was terrified. They were alone, miles from the nearest town, and her phone showed no service. The wind howled through the trees. Every instinct told her to drag him into the car and drive. But before she could, headlights flared behind her, a truck screeched to a stop. For a split second, relief washed over her. Help, she thought. Someone else had seen. But then 3 men jumped out, faces hard, eyes cold, one of them holding a knife. Mason's eyes widened with terror. "Run," he croaked. That's... Before she could react, the men lunged. Clara's heart froze. She instinctively moved between them and Mason, shouting, "Stop! He's bleeding. You'll kill him." One of them snarled, "That's the point." The first blow came fast, hot pain slicing across her arm as the knife grazed her. She screamed but didn't back down. She swung the metal flashlight she'd grabbed from her car, hitting one of them square in the jaw. He fell back with a grunt. "Leave him alone," she yelled, voice breaking. Another man grabbed her by the hair, pulling her backward, but she twisted free, landing a desperate kick. The third man tackled her to the ground. Rain splattered her face, blinding her. She felt the knife again once, twice, searing pain bursting through her side. She gasped, trying to fight back, hands clawing at the mud. "Stop!" she cried again, but they didn't stop. The world turned into chaos, grunts, curses, the metallic smell of blood thick in the air. Mason, weak as he was, tried to crawl toward her. "Get off her," he shouted hoarsely. One of the attackers turned, kicking him hard. Clara barely felt the 7th stab. Everything was heat and darkness. She collapsed next to Mason, rain pooling in the wounds on her arms. The attackers finally ran off. When they heard sirens, someone else must have called the police. Their taillights vanished into the night, swallowed by the storm. Her breathing was shallow. "You okay?" she whispered. Mason looked at her, blood running down his cheek. "You saved me," he said weakly. "You didn't have to..." "Yeah, I did," she murmured. That's what people do." Her vision blurred. She thought she saw red and blue lights flashing in the distance. Her fingers trembled, reaching for Mason's hand. And then everything went black. When Clara opened her eyes again, the world was white and sterile. Beeping monitors. The faint hum of hospital lights. Pain radiated through her body like fire. She tried to move, but her ribs screamed in protest. A nurse hurried over. Easy," she said softly. "You're in St. Mary's. You've been through a lot." Clara blinked, confused. "The soldier. Mason, is he?" The nurse hesitated, then smiled gently. He's alive. Because of you. Clara exhaled, relief flooding her. But then the memories crashed back, the truck, the knives, the screams. Her throat tightened. They tried to kill him. They tried to kill us both. The nurse squeezed her hand. The police know. They caught 2 of them. You don't need to worry right now. Just rest. For the next few days, Clara drifted between sleep and pain. Her mother came, her friends visited, the local news even ran a story calling her the nurse who fought for a soldier. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt broken, 7 stab wounds, 3 surgeries. Endless nightmares. Every night she woke up sweating, hearing the rain again, feeling the knife in her side. She tried to convince herself she did the right thing, but part of her wondered if it was worth it. Mason was recovering in another room down the hall. She hadn't seen him since that night on the 5th morning. Just as dawn painted the hospital walls gold, a nurse came in and whispered, "You have visitors." Clara frowned. "My mom's not coming till noon." The nurse smiled. "Not your mom? You'll want to see this." A moment later, the door opened, and in walked 4 men in marine dress blues. Their polished shoes clicked on the tile floor, their faces solemn but kind. The leader, a tall man with gray at his temples, saluted her. "Miss Hayes, I'm Colonel Richards, United States Marine Corps. We heard what you did." Clara blinked, stunned. You didn't have to come all this way," the colonel shook his head. "Ma'am, after what you did, it's the least we could do." He stepped closer, holding out a small box. "Private Mason is one of ours. He's alive because you stood between him and death. The Corps doesn't forget that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do it for thanks, I just couldn't let him die." "I know," the colonel said softly. "That's exactly why it matters." He opened the box. Inside was a metal shining silver, engraved with words she could barely read through the tears blurring her vision. "This is the Navy and Marine Corps Medal," he said. "It's awarded for heroism not involving conflict with the enemy. It's given to those who risk their lives to save another. Miss Hayes, that's what you did." Clara's hands trembled as he placed it in her palm. The weight of it felt unreal, too heavy for the moment. She looked up at the 4 men standing at attention in her hospital room, and for the first time since that night she let herself cry. Not from pain, but from something deeper: gratitude, disbelief, the fragile beauty of being seen. The Marines saluted, and Colonel Richards added quietly, "Private Mason will walk again. He said to tell you that you gave him back more than his life, you gave him hope." Clara smiled through the tears. "Tell him. He gave me something too." The colonel nodded once. "Semper Fi, Miss Hayes." Then they turned and left, their footsteps echoing down the hall. Leaving her alone with the medal glinting softly in her hand, she looked at it for a long time, remembering the rain, the blood, the fear, and how, even in the darkest moment, she hadn't backed down. She didn't feel like a hero. But maybe heroism wasn't about feeling brave. Maybe it was about doing what was right, even when you're terrified. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, pouring light into the room. Clara closed her eyes, letting it warm her face, and whispered, "He's going to be okay." Somewhere down the hall, a Marine laughed softly, alive because she refused to give up. Clara didn't sleep that night. The medal rested on her bedside table, its silver edges catching the dim hospital light. She kept glancing at it, half expecting it to vanish, as if the entire day had been some strange dream. But it was real. Every time she shifted, her ribs burned, her side ached, and the reality of what she had lived through came rushing back like a tide. She couldn't hold back. Her mother had fallen asleep in the chair beside her, hand still holding Clara's. The quiet hum of the monitors filled the room, steady and calm. In sharp contrast to the chaos she remembered from that night. When morning came, the first thing she asked was, "Can I see Mason?" The nurse smiled. "He's been asking the same thing." It took her nearly 20 minutes to get to his room, her body still weak and wrapped in bandages, her steps slow and careful. When she finally pushed the door open, Mason was sitting up, his arm in a sling, a fresh scar cutting across his cheek but alive. He looked up, and for a long moment neither of them said a word. Then he smiled. You made it. Clara laughed softly, though it hurt to breathe. You too. He shook his head, eyes glistening. They told me you were out for 2 days. I thought... He trailed off, his voice breaking. I thought you'd die out there, she whispered. You were bleeding so much. I would have, he said quietly. If you hadn't stopped. She looked away, swallowing hard. I don't feel like a hero. Mason's smile faded. Neither do I, but you are one. He reached for her hand, and for the first time since that night, she felt the warmth of connection, not as a nurse saving a patient, but as two people who had seen death and come back from the edge together. In the days that followed, the hospital turned into something of a media circus. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, eager to interview the nurse who saved a Marine. Her story spread fast. Local news ran the footage first, then the national outlets picked it up. Headlines called her the Angel of Highway 47 and the woman who fought death with bare hands. Clara hated the attention, every interview. Every camera shoved in her face made her stomach twist. They wanted her to talk about courage, but all she remembered were screams and blood and the freezing rain. The story people wanted was clean and heroic. The truth wasn't. Still, she couldn't ignore what came with it, the letters. Hundreds of them. Strangers from across the country sent her notes of gratitude, prayers, and words like "you" reminded us what humanity means. One morning, a little girl sent a hand-drawn picture of Clara wearing a cape and wrote, "You're my hero." Clara cried when she saw it. Mason was released from the hospital before her. His injuries were severe but healing, and before he left, he came to see her one last time. He walked in wearing civilian clothes, his posture still stiff from pain. Holding something behind his back. "I brought you something," he said, a shy smile tugging at his lips. She raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to." He pulled out a folded American flag, carefully folded in the traditional triangle. "It's not official or anything," he said, "but it's from my unit. The guys wanted you to have it." Clara stared at it, speechless. "It's beautiful," she said finally. He nodded. "We keep it as a reminder of the ones who watch over us." "You earned it." There was a long silence. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. Then Mason stepped forward, gently hugged her, and whispered, "You didn't just save my life. You changed it." When he left, Clara felt both emptier and fuller than ever. Weeks passed. She was discharged from the hospital, her body still aching, but her spirit slowly stitching itself back together. Life outside the sterile walls felt overwhelming, the noise of traffic, the flash of lights, the shadow of the street where everything happened. For a long time, she avoided that road, but one evening she drove there. She parked at the same spot, just to look. The rain had started again, light this time, misting against the windshield. She sat there in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel. As memories of that night replayed every scream, every heartbeat, every drop of rain like a ghost whispering, she whispered into the quiet, "You did the right thing." And for the first time she believed it. A few months later, Clara was invited to a ceremony at the Marine base where Mason's unit was stationed. The letter came in the mail, formal, crisp, with the Marine Corps seal at the top. "You are cordially invited to the 3rd Battalion Annual Commendation Ceremony." Her hands trembled as she read it. She wasn't sure she wanted to go. She still walked with a limp. The scars were healing, but the nightmares weren't gone. But something inside her whispered that she needed to face this, not for her, but for everyone who never got the chance to. When she arrived at the base, the sun was setting behind the hangars, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Rows of Marines stood in formation, the sound of boots striking the ground echoing through the open space. Mason was there, standing tall in his dress uniform, a faint smile spreading across his face when he saw her. The ceremony was beautiful. They spoke of valor, of sacrifice, of brotherhood, and then the commanding officer took the podium. "Tonight," he said, "we honor not only the men and women in uniform, but also a civilian whose courage embodies the very spirit of the Marine Corps." Clara felt her breath hitch as the officer gestured toward her. "Miss Clara Hayes risked her life for one of our own." She faced down danger armed with nothing but compassion and courage. She reminded us all that heroism doesn't wear a uniform, it lives in the heart. The applause was thunderous. Mason stepped forward, holding a small framed photo of the two of them in the hospital, smiling weakly at each other. "This," he said, his voice trembling, "is what hope looks like." Clara's eyes filled again, tears shimmering in the orange light. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if she could. But as Mason handed her the frame, she simply whispered, "Thank you." After the ceremony, as people mingled and music played softly in the background, a young Marine approached her. He couldn't have been older than 20. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "my sister's a nurse. She always says she doesn't know if she's strong enough for it. Can I tell her about you?" Clara smiled, her voice gentle. "Tell her she already is." That night she stood outside the base under the stars, holding the flag Mason had given her months before. The breeze tugged at her hair, the world quiet and still, and then she heard footsteps behind her. "Mason again?" He was smiling. "You know," he said softly, "when they told me about that medal, I thought they were exaggerating. But after tonight, I don't think they gave you enough." Clara laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I don't need medals. I just need to sleep without seeing rain." He nodded slowly. "You will." They stood there together for a long time, watching the stars. The pain wasn't gone, not for either of them, but it had changed. It had become something they carried together, quietly, like a promise that they'd both keep going. When Mason left to rejoin his unit months later, he wrote her one final letter. She found it tucked inside the folded flag dot. It said, "For most of my life, I believed heroes wore armor. Then I met one who wore scrubs. You didn't just save me that night, Clara, you saved a part of me I thought was gone. I'll spend every day trying to live up to the courage you showed when no one was watching." Clara pressed the letter to her chest and cried. Not from sadness, this time, but from pride and peace. And something deeper that she started speaking publicly months later, not about herself, but about kindness, compassion, and courage. She visited hospitals, schools, and veteran centers, telling her story not as a tale of violence, but of hope. People always asked her why she risked her life that night. She always gave the same answer: because someone needed help. And if we start turning away when people need us most, we lose the best parts of ourselves. Every time she said it, she meant it a little more. Months turned into a year, but that night never really left her. Even when the scars faded, even when the nightmares came less often, Clara carried the weight of it everywhere she went. Some days it was a whisper in the back of her mind. Other days it was a storm that refused to quiet down. But slowly, through pain, patience, and purpose, she found ways to turn the darkness into something meaningful. After the ceremony at the Marine base, her story kept spreading. Veterans groups reached out to her, schools invited her to speak, and strangers wrote her letters thanking her for reminding them what courage looks like. She wasn't used to the attention, she didn't even think she deserved it, but she accepted the invitations because she realized something important. If her story could make one person believe in kindness again, it was worth telling. The first time she stood on a stage, her hands shook. It was a small auditorium at a community center, maybe 50 people in the crowd. The microphone felt heavy in her hands, her palms slick with sweat. She started by saying, "I'm not a soldier, I'm not a superhero. I'm just a nurse who saw someone bleeding and couldn't walk away." The audience was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then she told them everything about the rain, the truck, the terror, the moment she thought she was going to die. And when she finished, she said quietly, "People call me brave. But I wasn't brave. I was scared out of my mind." Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. When she stepped off the stage, people stood and clapped. But one woman in the front row, older, with tired eyes, came up to her in tears. She said, "My son's in the Marines. I worry every night. You reminded me there are still good people out there who would stand by him." That moment stayed with Clara more than any medal ever could. Meanwhile, Mason was healing too. Physically, he was almost back to full strength, though his left arm still bore a long scar from the attack. But emotionally, he carried guilt, the kind that never really goes away. He told Clara once in a letter, "You saved me, but part of me still feels like I failed you. I should have protected you that night. Clara wrote back, "You didn't fail me. You reminded me that life is worth fighting for." They stayed in touch constantly, calls, letters, messages. Sometimes he'd send her photos from his deployment, little snapshots of dusty bases, sunsets over desert hills and fellow soldiers smiling. Sometimes she'd send him pictures of the children's ward where she worked again. The kids she helped, the lives she touched every day. One morning she got a package in the mail. Inside was a small, carved wooden box. When she opened it, she found a medal inside Mason's own Purple Heart. Beneath it was a note, "You earned this more than I did." She called him immediately. "Mason, you can't send me that." He laughed softly. "It's not about the medal, Clara. It's about remembering what that night meant. You didn't just save my life, you gave it purpose." She was quiet for a moment, voice trembling. "You gave mine purpose too." After that, something unspoken grew between them. It wasn't love in the traditional sense, not yet, but it was something deeper. A bond forged in fear, pain, and the kind of shared understanding only people who face death together can know. When Mason finally returned home for good, he visited her in person for the first time since the ceremony. It was spring, the city blooming again, the air warm and alive. Clara was tending to her small garden when she heard his voice behind her. "You still can't keep plants alive, huh?" She turned, stunned, and then laughed through sudden tears. "Mason!" He grinned, walking toward her. "You're supposed to water them more than once a month, you know." She hit him playfully on the arm, then froze, realizing he was actually there, solid, smiling, alive. For a moment, all she could do was stare. "Welcome home," she whispered. He nodded. "Feels good to be back." They sat on the porch for hours that day, talking about everything and nothing, the war, the attack, the things they'd both lost and gained. At one point, Mason said quietly, "You know, when you were in that hospital bed, I promised myself I'd do something to honor what you did for me. I re-enlisted not because I wanted to fight again, but because I wanted to help the guys who come back broken. The ones who don't think they deserve to live." Clara smiled softly. "That sounds like you found your purpose." He looked at her. "I think you helped me find it." Over the next year, Mason started working with a veterans recovery program, mentoring soldiers who struggled with PTSD, addiction, and guilt. Clara, inspired by his dedication, began volunteering at the same center as a medical advisor. Together, they helped dozens of veterans rebuild their lives. They became a team, not in battle, but in healing. One evening, after a long day at the center, they sat outside on the steps, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mason broke the silence. "You ever think about that night?" Clara sighed. "Every day, but not in the same way. I used to relive it because of the fear. Now, I think about it because of what it gave me." He nodded slowly. "What's that?" She smiled faintly. "A reason to keep going, and someone who understands." Mason looked at her for a long moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea how much that means to me." For the first time since that night, Clara realized something incredible. Out of one moment of horror, something beautiful had grown. Something unbreakable, but life, as always, had more to test them with. A few months later, tragedy struck their veterans center. A young Marine named Kyle, one of Mason's mentees, took his own life. Mason was shattered. He blamed himself, said he should have seen the signs. Clara found him one night sitting alone in the empty therapy room, head in his hands. "It's my fault," he muttered. "He called me 2 nights ago. I didn't pick up. I thought I'd call him back later." Clara knelt beside him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You can't save everyone, Mason. You can only keep trying." "I promised myself I'd never let anyone else die on my watch," he whispered. She touched his shoulder. "You didn't fail him. You gave him hope when no one else did. Sometimes hope just isn't enough." Mason looked up, broken. "How do you do it? How do you keep believing after everything?" Clara's voice shook, but her words were steady. "Because the world doesn't get better by giving up on it. Every act of kindness, every person we help, that's what keeps the light alive. Even if it flickers, even if it's small, it matters." Those words stayed with him. They held a memorial for Kyle a week later, and Mason spoke. He told the crowd about a woman who'd saved his life when she had every reason to run, and how that single act had taught him that the greatest battles are the ones fought for someone else. Clara stood in the back, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. That night, as they left the memorial together, Mason turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think you were the one who saved me, but I think we saved each other." She smiled through the tears. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. By the time the second anniversary of that night came, Clara had changed. She wasn't the same exhausted nurse who drove down that lonely road. She was stronger, softer, wiser. The scars on her body had faded into thin white lines, but the ones inside had become something else, reminders of resilience, of love, of courage that comes quietly and stays forever. She and Mason often returned to that stretch of highway, not out of grief anymore, but gratitude. They'd stand there in silence, hand in hand. As cars passed by, unaware of the history hidden in the wet asphalt. Once, Mason said quietly, "It's strange, isn't it? The place where we almost died became the place that brought us to life." Clara nodded, eyes glistening. "Maybe that's what miracles look like," he smiled faintly. "If it is, then I've been living one ever since." That night as they drove away, rain started to fall again, soft, gentle, familiar. But this time Clara didn't flinch. She rolled down the window, let the droplets touch her face, and smiled, because the rain didn't remind her of pain anymore. It reminded her of survival. It was a crisp morning 2 years after the night that changed everything. The sky stretched wide and open, washed in pale gold. Clara stood outside her small home, tying her hair back as she looked at the growing crowd gathering down the street. New community center was opening that day, built in honor of veterans, nurses, and first responders. The sign above the entrance read in bold letters, "The Hayes Mason Center for Hope." Clara's throat tightened when she saw it. She hadn't asked for her name to be on it. In fact, she'd protested. But Mason insisted. "You are the heart of this," he'd said. "This center is as much yours as anyone's." She smiled faintly, running her fingers along the edges of the engraved letters. The metal was cool under her fingertips. Every line of her name felt like a memory etched in pain, but reborn in purpose. The ceremony began quietly. No big speeches, no flashing cameras. Just people, soldiers, nurses, families, survivors, gathered to celebrate something that had grown out of tragedy. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, hands clasped in front of her. Feeling small and humbled, Mason took the podium first. He looked different now, older, stronger, but with the same quiet light in his eyes. He adjusted the microphone, his voice calm but steady. 2 years ago, I almost didn't make it. I was left on a dark road, bleeding, believing I was alone. But a woman I'd never met stopped her car that night. She didn't think about danger. She didn't think about herself. She just said, "I can fix this," and she did. She fixed more than my body, she fixed my faith in humanity. The crowd was silent. Every eye was on him. He smiled softly, glancing toward Clara. "Since then, I've learned that courage doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't need rank or recognition. Courage is a nurse kneeling in the rain, a mother comforting her child, a stranger choosing compassion when the world looks the other way." Clara's eyes glistened. She looked down, unable to stop the tears. Mason continued. "This center isn't just a building. It's a promise that no one has to face their battles alone. That when life knocks you down, there will be hands waiting to lift you up. That's what Clara taught me. That's what she taught all of us." The audience rose in applause. Clara wiped her cheeks, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. When Mason gestured for her to join him, she hesitated, but then she stepped forward, trembling, and took the stage. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her voice caught in her throat as she looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, uniformed, wounded, healed. All of them carrying stories, just like hers. "I don't know what to say," she began softly. "I never thought my life would lead me here. I used to think courage was something you were born with, but it's not. Courage is something you find when the world gives you no other choice." She took a deep breath. "That night I didn't think. I just acted, because I saw someone in pain. And maybe that's what heroism really is, not big gestures, not medals, not headlines. Just seeing someone who's hurting and deciding not to look away. Her words lingered in the air like prayer. I was scared that night, she continued. I still get scared sometimes. But I learned that fear doesn't define us. What we do despite fear, that's what defines us. The crowd stood in silence for a long time, the weight of her words sinking deep. Then, as if on cue, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the courtyard in light. After the ceremony, people came up one by one to thank her veterans with tears in their eyes. Young nurses saying she inspired them to keep going, mothers hugging her like family. And for once, she didn't shy away from the attention. She accepted it with grace, with humility, with gratitude later that afternoon. When the crowd had gone and the sun began to dip low, Clara sat on the steps of the new center beside Mason. They watched kids playing nearby. Families laughing, volunteers carrying boxes inside. It's beautiful, she said softly. He nodded. It's everything we hoped it would be. They sat in silence for a while, letting the sounds of life fill the air. Birds, laughter, footsteps, the gentle music of peace. After a while, Mason spoke again. You ever think about how far we've come? Clara smiled faintly. Every day. I still remember that night like it just happened. Sometimes I wonder how I ever had the strength to stand there. You didn't stand, Mason said with a grin. You fought. And somehow you made it through. She laughed quietly. I guess we both did. He looked at her, eyes soft. Do you ever regret stopping that night? Clara thought about it for a long moment. The rain, the blood, the fear, the way her body had screamed in pain, the nightmares that followed. And then everything that had come after. The people she'd met, the lives she'd touched, the hope she'd found again. She shook her head slowly. No, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Mason nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I. For a while, they just sat there, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky burned with shades of orange and crimson, and for the first time in years, Clara felt completely at peace. A soft breeze lifted her hair, and she closed her eyes, listening to the wind. Somewhere inside her, she heard a quiet voice, a memory of her own words from that night. That's what people do. And she smiled. Months later, the center became a beacon for hundreds of veterans and civilians alike. Programs for PTSD, therapy sessions, community outreach, youth education, everything built around one simple idea. No one should suffer alone. Clara ran the medical side of it, while Mason coordinated veteran mentorship programs. They worked side by side, day after day, turning pain into purpose. One evening, after a particularly long day, they stood in the quiet hallway of the center. The lights were dim, the world outside hushed. Clara looked at the photos hanging on the wall, images of smiling faces. Graduations, reunions, new beginnings, all people who had once been broken. Now whole again, she whispered. Look at them. Every one of them a story. Mason stepped closer. All because one person refused to drive away. She turned to him, tears glimmering in her eyes. No, because we refused to give up. He smiled, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they'd endured. Everything they built. When he finally reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. The world outside continued as usual, cars passing, people laughing, life moving forward. But for Clara, everything slowed. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat reminded her of that night, and how far she had come from it. That night didn't define her anymore. It refined her. It turned a wounded nurse into a warrior of compassion. It turned a broken soldier into a builder of hope. And together, they turned tragedy into something eternal, a legacy of kindness, courage, and love. Years later, when journalists revisited the story, they asked Clara one last question during an interview. If you could go back to that night, knowing what would happen, would you still stop your car? She didn't even hesitate. She smiled softly and said, yes, every single time. The interviewer paused. Why? Clara looked at the camera, eyes bright but steady. Because sometimes life gives you a choice to be safe or to be kind. I chose kind. And it saved both of us. That clip went viral. Millions of people watched it. Some cried. Some were inspired. Many shared it, writing comments like, "This restored my faith in humanity and we need more Claras in the world." But for Clara, it wasn't about fame. It never was. It was about reminding people that the smallest acts of courage can change everything. Because in the end, heroism isn't found in the headlines. It's found in the quiet choices that no one sees. It's in the nurse who doesn't look away, the soldier who refuses to give up, the stranger who stops in the rain, and maybe, just maybe, it's in all of us waiting for the moment when the world needs us most. The screen fades to black, a soft piano begins to play, then a voice, gentle, steady, hopeful, speaks. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let others remember what kindness can do. Because you never know whose life you might change simply by choosing to care. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so together we can keep these stories alive. The final words appear on screen. Kindness is the greatest act of courage.